and welcome to the Art of Being Human. Now, we have been talking about ways to distract yourself so that if you're at a very high level of anxiety, you can lessen the anxiety, you can damp it down, and then as a result of that, your anxiety would be less. And when I was talking about EMDR, and I'm not going to really go over it again, but there was a lot of eye blinking going on. And it wasn't a hard thing to do, but there were cases of people who had suffered from anxiety for years. And when they went ahead and did this on a routine basis, within about a month, they started to feel better. And they felt better and better and better. So now they don't have to do it much anymore, or occasionally, but not all the time. So when you start something like this, you may find that you have to do it frequently. And that's okay. If you need to do it frequently, you do it frequently. And then eventually it gets so you kind of have gotten used to having less anxiety, and you can progress and you can use it less and less and less until you're practically recovered. And the goal is that you can remember what happened to you in the past, but it doesn't have to haunt you. You can look at your past and you can say, yes, this was terrible, this was abuse, this happened to me, I was very uncomfortable, I went through a lot of emotions, but now it's like something in the distant past. I can look at it as a past event, but not a present problem. The problem with the way we react to things is that it's always a present problem because we're always experiencing it like we've experienced it the first time, with the exception of the fact that our mind twists things and we don't remember things exactly as they were. Sometimes we embellish things and we don't even know we're doing it. This is not something that we do deliberately, but sometimes our take on things are different as time goes by. Sometimes that in itself eases the anxiety, but sometimes it can make it just as bad, maybe even worse. So what we need is something to damp down the anxiety, and what I'm going to talk to you about today is happening. I've mentioned it before. I'm going to, and it's important if you want to do something like this, that you go online or you see a therapist that's trained in doing it and get the instructions. I'm only giving you a general sense of what occurs, and the sequence of doing things here is important. I think it's a little more complicated than EMDR, but there are a lot of these kind of programs out there, and whatever works for you works for you. But you need to get a good start, and you need to get a right start. As I said, I'm not acting as a therapist for you. If somebody does it with you, then they're with you as you're doing it. And then when you complete it and you do it enough, then you can do it practically from memory by yourself. It will take you longer than what I can describe in a half-hour show. But I'm going to show you what happens in a session of happening. And I have never been through this, but I've read about it, I've studied it, and the reason is that I want to tap into some of these things because they seem to be particularly helpful to people who have anxiety, and it's worth looking into if it's helpful. It may change the way that you look at things enough so that at some point you may not need to do it, but your reasoning brain takes over and your primitive brain has less importance, and you can live a much more normal life, being able to reason your way through it. But to begin with, you need something to help with the anxiety. So this is what's happening in a happening session. You are asked to recall, so you're in the office, you are asked to recall a distressing event in as much detail as you can. The purpose of doing that is to bring it up so that you will re-experience the emotions, because that's the reason that you're there in the office to begin with. You're re-experiencing these emotions at various times, and that's bad, and it's hard for you. And so what you are doing now is you're deliberately bringing up those same emotions in as much detail as you can. The detail is important because it will reinforce the emotions that you have. For abuse, mugging, maybe something that you did, any memory that causes you repeated distress will be included in what I consider to be trauma. So then when you bring up these emotions, this may take some time. I mean, it's easy enough for me to tell you in 2 minutes, bring up all of this stuff, but you're experiencing, and then you have, as you're experiencing, you've got to rate how difficult is this for you? Is your anxiety at a low level from 0, or is it a very high level at 10? Now this is going to take you some time probably in an office to figure this out. Yeah, I'm experiencing this. Yeah, it's getting a little worse. Maybe I'm at a 4 or a 5. They like to have you at a fairly high level of anxiety. This is where you can attack the anxiety and bring it down and teach people to bring it down. So you rate the anxiety, excuse me while I take a sip here. So you rate the anxiety on a scale of 0 to 10. Then what you do is gently stroke your arms from the shoulder to the elbow. I imagine it's because you're sitting down, and this is the handiest way to do it. The stroking effect will be a calming effect anyway. It introduces brain waves, delta brain waves, which are more relaxing and comforting. So I don't know how long you do this for, but you do it from shoulder to elbow. And then after you do that, you rub your hands across your forehead, same kind of thing. Then after you do that, you rub your palms like this. Okay, so you're sitting there, and I'm just reviewing what I've told you so far. You're recalling an event that's bothering you. Now, you may go in without any particular event in mind, but what the therapist will ask you to do is to think specifically of an event that is really, really bothering you. And as you think about that, you think about the fire that caused you to lose your home. You think about your divorce. You think about the fact that you got into an accident and your leg was broken. You think about the fact that you lost your job and you didn't know what you were going to do next. You know, there's any myriad of things that can put you in a state of trauma. So you think and you decide on something, and then you're thinking about it, and you're thinking about it, and you're thinking about it, and you gradually, and sometimes it happens very quickly, you gradually or quickly experience emotions, all of these emotions. And so I'm in distress, I'm nervous, I'm scared, I'm feeling depressed, I want to cry, all of this kind of thing. Then you're at kind of a picture of your emotional nature at its worst, or from your perspective at its worst. From a therapist's perspective, it's at its best for them to work with it. And then you rate it. How, on a scale of 0 to 10, how bad is it? Well, I guess I'm at about an 8. Or a 9 or a 10. They like to have it as high as possible. At least from my perspective, I think they do as a therapist. And then you start stroking yourself. Rub the arm from the shoulder to the elbow, across the forehead, and rubbing your hands. That by itself is a distraction, because you're doing something physically. When you're doing something physically and you're not just sitting there thinking, that forms a distraction. And maybe that's what gets you started on being able to learn distractive techniques so that your anxiety will go down. You know, I have taught people, this is kind of an aside, I have taught people to have a worry time. If you're going to worry about something, arrange a worry time. Be specific about it. Don't worry at any other time. Worry from 6 to 7 on a Friday night, whatever you choose. You know, it may be 6 to 7 every night. And you'll find that if you don't allow yourself to worry until that time, when you get to that time, you can't worry. Well, back to the happening. I don't want to mix up what I'm doing here. So you're stroking your arm, your forehead, your palms of your hands, and so forth. And now what you have to do is you close your eyes and you imagine that you're climbing a staircase with 20 steps. There are 20 steps to that staircase. You've got to concentrate, and the reason that you're closing your eyes is that you can imagine this with your eyes closed much better than you can imagine it with your eyes open. And that's where the figure ground comes in. The figure is the staircase that you are imagining, and it's 20 steps. So you have to go 1, 2, as you go up the staircase, all 20 steps, and you count those out. And you're not necessarily doing it fast. You're sitting there, you're counting to 20. And in your mind, with your eyes closed, you're imagining that you are climbing those steps, 20 steps, 20 steps. And then you count the steps aloud with each step. And you imagine as you're taking each step that your anxiety is going down, that you're not so nervous as you was before. So if you're doing this verbally and talking at the same time, which actually the therapist would want you to do, you're thinking, okay, step 4, not as scared as step 3, step 5, step 6, getting less and less anxious. I'm less and less nervous. The higher I go, I'm less and less. And you're kind of telling yourself this as you're going along. Now with EMDR, you had your eyes closed and you're saying, I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid, nothing's going to happen to me. The therapist is here, nothing's going to happen to me. As you're saying that, you know, as you're thinking about that. Here you're talking about it. Every step, you go up one step, less anxiety. Another step, a little less anxiety. Now it may be pretty slow going. There are 20 steps, that seems like a lot. You can't rush 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, I'm there. You know, it's not going to work that way. You have to take your time with it. You have to think about it. I'm on step 5. Do I feel any less anxious than I was when I was on step 1? Well, yes, a little. Now, you kind of talk yourself into it. You know, you're talking like it's happening. I'm less anxious. I'm less anxious. I'm less anxious. And then you go up to step 20, and the thing that's important is that when you are doing this, you're thinking about less anxiety, so you're kind of programming yourself to have less anxiety. Row by row by row. After you get to the 20th step, your eyes are still closed, and you start humming 2 rounds of a song, Row, Row, Row Your Boat, or something like that. And I think the song that's suggested is Row, Row, Row Your Boat. And everybody knows that song. It's a child's song. And you sing it twice, and you hum it. You hum it aloud. The therapist can hear you humming it. Or if you don't want to use Row, Row, Row Your Boat, you can use another neutral song. Mary Had a Little Lamb. I mean, there's tons of them out there. Then you open your eyes, and you look to the right, and you look to the left, and you're looking to the right, and you're looking to the left. Then you inhale, and then you exhale. Inhale and exhale. Now, the distraction is important. We consider ourselves to be very intellectual people, and I'm contending that that's not true. We are intellectual people, otherwise we wouldn't be able to do the things that we do. But when a crisis hits, our first reaction is emotional. Usually it's emotional. Now, it may not be for all people, but usually it's emotional. You're scared. You're angry, something's happened, you worry, what do I do now? And so the distraction is that it gets you off that panicky mode into something that's predictable and stable and inconsequential. Anyone can have their imagination, close their eyes, and count 20 steps at the same time, talking to yourself. I'm not as nervous, I'm not as nervous, I'm not as scared, as you go that 20 steps up to the top rung, and then opening up your eyes, and then looking to the left and looking to the right. You're actually changing the way that your structure of your nervous system works a little bit, because you're doing something and you're distracting yourself from the distraction. The distraction is you pat yourself on the arm and the head and do this with your hands, and that's distracting enough. That gets you distracted enough for the next distraction, and I don't know if it was set up this way. I'm just going through what I think in my mind as I'm talking about it. So this isn't coming from any textbook. It's just coming from my reaction to it. And then you set up those 20 steps. I had one person that I knew that I counseled that couldn't imagine anything. If I say to you, close your eyes and imagine a tree, and describe the tree to me, every person that's doing this will have a different tree. Some will be full maples with all kinds of leaves, others will be willow trees, others will be evergreen trees, you know. Everybody will have their own image of what their tree looks like when they're thinking about tree. So if I ask you to close your eyes and think tree, you will bring up an image of a tree that you bring up, that your mind brings up. You know, or you may bring up several images of trees. But I had one person I counseled that couldn't bring up anything. When you close your eyes, it's dark, you don't see anything. Well, think of a chair. I can't think of anything. It's dark, it's closed. He did not have the ability to picture anything in his mind. For a person like that, and I don't know how many there are, I think most people can imagine a lot of things, but for a person like that, I'm not sure that this exercise would help them. Because you've got to be able to imagine something. You've got to distract yourself. Then you've got to be able to imagine those 20 steps. What are your 20 steps looking like? You know, are they straight up and down? Do you have a little area that breaks it? So like a curve, so you walk up so much and then you walk up in another direction for another 5 or 6 steps? Or is there a landing somewhere in those 20 steps? Or is it straight up and straight down? Do you get a full picture? You know, maybe a window and a wall or a staircase, you know, with a handle or a banister that you can grab. Everybody's visualization of what the staircase would look like is individual to their person. So we're not all alike, and that's okay. We're not supposed to be. The thing is, if you can imagine 20 steps, somebody might only be able to imagine 5 steps at a time. That's as far as they can go. And then they can imagine another 5 steps or another 5 steps, you know. But the ideal is to imagine those 20 steps and to count them. There's something about counting, about the numbers of it, and talking to yourself at the same time that you're counting. 5 step, I'm not as nervous. 10 steps, I'm not as nervous. 15 steps, I'm not as nervous. And doing that like that, because you're distracting yourself from, I've just lost my job. I've just been fired. Something terrible happened. I was just in an accident, and this kind of thing. And so this distraction is important because the brain does not do well trying to process 2 things at the same time. We tend to think of ourselves as being multitasking. Well, I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this. The brain can't do that. We only trick ourselves into thinking that we can do that. We think that we can multitask. We don't multitask very well. Our brains can't do it. When our brains are focusing on one thing, everything else becomes ground. That's why you can't be focusing on everything that you're doing at the same time. Now, I'm going to add this as a kind of like as an aside. One of the problems I think that people have that use drugs, and I'm talking about things like LSD, drugs where you change the brain structure. Excuse me, I need another drink here. This is allergy season. One of the problems they have, I think, for people who have an LSD and that kind of a drug, hallucinatory drugs is what I'm thinking about, is that they can't do figure ground. I think everything that they're thinking about has equal importance. They can't think about driving a car. They're going to be concentrating as much on the scenery and as the people that they're passing by as they are driving the car. So their figure ground, from my perspective, this is what I think. Now, I could be right, I can be wrong, but this is what I'm thinking after dealing with people and dealing with some drug-addicted people. Everything becomes figure. Nothing becomes ground. So if they're reading and the music is on in the background on the radio, they can't differentiate. I'm reading and the music becomes background and it's there and I'm aware of it, but I'm not focusing on it, but it's there. everything's figure. They would have to pay as much attention to the music on the radio as they did in what they're trying to read and write or study or whatever it is they're trying to do. So there's an imbalance. They can't do figure and ground. But we do it all the time as people who just, are living. We do it all the time. We don't even stop to think of it. It's just a part of what we are living through. But drug-addicted people have trouble with it. So you distract yourself from the memories of what you're doing through this kind of thing that you're doing. And as a result of that, at some point, you no longer need to have a whole lot of step-by-step distractions in order to calm yourself down. In a sense, this gives you an opportunity to learn how to do it. And the touching that you do to yourself, it triggers the production of low-frequency delta waves, which is very relaxing, very comforting. And in the end, you can remember something, but it doesn't have to haunt you. This has long-term effects, or at least the EMDR does. This is new. So I'm not sure what the long-term effects, but people who have used EMDR find that over a long period of time, they get less and less anxious. They can use it less and less, but it's available for them if they need it, but they don't necessarily have to need it. So their brains, they can allow their conscious brains to say to them, this is the past. This is not now. I don't have to suffer like it happened then because it's not happening now. And they can kind of use their front brains to teach themselves that. But the distraction is important. So I think this is a little bit more complicated than what the EMDR is, but nonetheless has the same kind of effect. So but as I say before, I'm not a therapist on TV. I think that it's important in that you do something like this, you go to a person who's trained in it, and the other thing they will be looking for that you wouldn't be able to see yourself as unresolved issues that you really need therapeutic help with, that are unresolved and you need to have some therapy for. And they can also kind of sandwich that in. They can know that, and then they can bring it up to you. I notice that this is happening, that is happening as you're going through this, and I think you need to have some therapeutic work done in this area or that area. So combined with regular therapy, it's kind of a win-win. So at any rate, and even if you don't do anything like this, if you're high anxious, then concentrate on something that's immaterial in of itself, and then until the anxiety starts to lessen and lessen and lessen, and eventually you're going to get more and more control over it. Because basically we are emotional. We're not in control of our intellect, and we're not in control of our emotions, and our emotions affect our intellect all the time. We believe our emotions to be true. We may know better, but we believe them to be true. We believe that what our thinking is true as well, even if our thinking is kind of skewed and it's not exactly right. We believe it and consider it to be truth because we're the ones that's thinking it. So you have to keep your mind open to other explanations. You have to keep your mind open to the ability to change your mind if at some point you suddenly realize that you're not the one that's thinking quite straight, and other people have ideas and they're valuable too. We need to celebrate differences. I don't need to hate somebody because they're not like me. You don't have to hate me because I'm not like you. We need to celebrate our differences. We're individuals, and this is what we are supposed to be. But the purpose of these two classes, last one and this one, is to give you some ideas that will help you in terms of managing your own anxiety. We will be doing something else next time. So I'm going to close it here, and please join me next time.